Assalamu alaikum and welcome to you all for joining on. Thank you for joining on early and getting ready to go. We will be starting shortly and we're waiting for more attendees to come on in. So thank you for your patience before we start. Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining right on time here. We will be starting, inshallah, God willing, in just a couple of moments here. So thank you for your patience. Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to today's online lecture. My name is Sarish and I'm one of the United Islam Awareness Week organizers. I will be your MC today for the online lecture. Thank you all for joining. We are very pleased to be hosting Dr. Aysha Wazwaz today to cover the lecture topic of me, myself, and I. And you can see the poster here on the screen. The topic description for today is Have we become self-centered as individuals and as a society? Can Islam provide timeless solutions on fostering real connections in our community? Life can be isolating. Islam has the answer to living the best life for humanity by centering what is most important. So I'm really excited for today's lecture from Dr. Aysha. I hope you are all excited too and looking forward to it. Before we do begin though, we have a few announcements for you all and an introduction for Dr. Aysha, and then I will pass the mic off to her shortly. So a little bit about United Islam Awareness Week, the organization, and about the initiative as well. So established in 2013, United Islam Awareness Week is a long week campaign to represent the true message of Islam and its relevance to humanity. This year is actually the 12th annual United Islam Awareness Week, and it is taking place across Western Canada in collaboration with 5 organizations, including the University of Saskatchewan MSA, MSA UBC in British Columbia, Al-Huda School in Regina, and Al-Rashid Mosque in Edmonton, as well as Edmonton Islamic Academy. We also have 6 powerful speakers joining us as well, and this year's theme is Unlocking the Best Life, Know Your Purpose. We have lectures taking place every day in the evening at each location, and you can follow us on social media as well, particularly on Instagram at United UIAW for more info to also see the full schedules. In addition to these lectures, we're also hosting information booths each day in the locations until Friday, February 2nd this week. So if you have any questions about Islam, or if you're Muslim and you want to take a fellow friend or a fellow classmate, or even if you just want to hear more from your local organization who's taking part in United UIAW on the ground, please check those out and feel free to contact us or your local organization for more information. Now, for today's lecture, some housekeeping items for the platform that we are using. There is a public chat on the right side of your screen. I'm sure many of you are seeing it and already using it as well. Please be respectful and mindful while engaging throughout the lecture in the chat. We want to keep it as clear as possible for Dr. Aysha while she is speaking, but you are encouraged to engage in the chat and respond, especially if she's asking questions or share some insightful comments. So that is our public chat there on the right side. There's also a Q&A tab where you can submit your questions for Dr. Aysha, and we will be receiving those questions on our end and asking those to Dr. Aysha at the end of the lecture if time permits. If you are having any technical issues or having any technical questions, please privately message United UIAW Technical, who is logged in here as well. All right, that is it for our housekeeping rules for today. And now a little bit about Dr. Aysha. Dr. Aysha Wazwaz is the founder and lecturer at Gemsoflight Academy in the US to train women to become lecturers on Islam in the US. She is a lecturer of fiqh, Islamic legislator, family fiqh of worship, introduction to Islamic legislator, morals and behaviors in Islam, tajweed, which is Quranic recitation, Sirah, and other Islamic sciences in both Arabic and English languages. Dr. Aysha held women's weekly lectures in the US and in Jerusalem on issues that concern Muslim women, and she also taught Arabic as a second language. She has given lectures on a multitude of topics, including misconceptions about Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, women in Islam, polygamy in Islam, hijab in Islam, and more in the many institutions, including Swedish Theological Institute in Jerusalem, Palestine, University of Minnesota, University of St. Thomas, University of St. Kate, St. Paul College, and more. Dr. Aysha Wazwaz has a PhD in Islamic Studies with an honor from Jannah University. She has an MA in Contemporary Islamic Studies and a BA in Islamic Legislator from Al-Quds University. She speaks Arabic and English, and she is born in the US to a Palestinian father and a mixed mother from Palestinian and Paraguayan Spanish descent. She is also a chaplain at St. Catherine University, and Dr. Aysha is married to a Tanzanian scholar and has 3 children as well. So, mashallah, we are very excited to host Dr. Aysha again once this year. And without further ado, I will give the floor to her, Bismillah, to begin whenever she is ready. Please give her your full attention. Jazakumullah khairan, and thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I hope you're able to see the screen. Please do tell me if you are able to see it so we can start. And inshallah, excited to start this. And just by the way, I've actually been away from teaching for a month and a half right now, and it kind of feels really different to be back speaking and engaging in a lecture. I think it's taking me into a different feeling, because when you're not teaching, I think you're engaging in a different thing in life. But then when you're back teaching, you're not teaching. I know many people would think that you're the one that's actually presenting to the public, but in reality, it's actually taking you to navigate the different thoughts and for you to review all the different things that have been going on throughout this time. And I think I would always say, if you really want to grow in your spirituality, you would have to take the time to think within by actually presenting your thoughts to the others, because that's the way to actually go from me, myself, and I to actually going outside and letting others review and letting others help you vocalize the thoughts and you rethinking the thoughts. And subhanAllah, being in Malaysia with this outstanding, of course, before being in Minnesota in the cold weather, and right now being in Malaysia with a very, very hot weather, it is a very spectacular view here, but I wish I could share the view. And speaking of me, myself, and I think it was really taking me into a fresh start with, hey, have you been really far away and just living your me, myself, and I for a long while? And it really is a good start for me to review myself and take myself into a new journey. But here's one thing. Yes, although the lecture is really wanting to focus on the spiritual side of it, but I think it's also to answer some of those questions that at many times we don't think about it. We're living in a Western culture, living in a Western society, even if you're not living in a Western culture, but there's this globalization that is right now infiltrating our minds, infiltrating the media, in affecting all the different sides of our lifestyle, the way we engage with one another, even the social interaction had really changed. Just to make sure we're recording this, I hope she's remembering to record it. So this lecture aims to address the following questions. Have we become self-centered as a society? Have we lost our values of family? And are we really losing our values of family and forgetting these sides of it? Is it of any importance at all? Have we lost our compassion and empathy? Can Islam provide timeless solutions on fostering real connections in our communities? So those are the questions that we're hoping to address, because when you're looking at the society, we may not notice that we're actually living in an individualist society. Now, here's one thing, is that I'm going to answer the questions, what does it mean to be an individual society? And am I here doing this somewhat of a comparison between an individualist society and a collective society? Does that mean that Islam actually advocates for a collective society over individualist society? I'm going to answer those questions, and I think it's important to answer those questions because it actually goes back to the Quran itself. You'll see that Islam actually considers that is a main issue in understanding yourself, and in understanding the society, and even in understanding the main purpose of your existence. Really, it's a question in where there's this echo of chamber of thinking about yourself and just reviewing things. And right now we're seeing this narcissism is becoming the new normal. And then everybody is speaking of a narcissist person that they're living with and that they're the ones that are victims. And the other narcissist person is complaining of the other narcissist person who is supposedly the victim. So right now we're seeing a whole society of just, I would say, bringing in more and more narcissists. So right now, we're really looking at something really dangerous that is at stake, which is individualism, that is really a hybrid of hedonism and capitalism. And there's that emphasis on the individual, and where it's you care about yourself, focus on your own goals and focusing on your own life. And at the end of the day, we're not seeing but really the emergence of a postmodern culture, in where it's creating a narrative. It's focusing on your emotions. Don't worry about the truth. There's no such thing as truth. That's the postmodern culture that is right now, I would say, this manipulation that's cultivating this individualist culture without us realizing. And then what we're failing to acknowledge is the profound impact of such ideologies that have an impact on our spirituality, our psychological well-being, and even our social interactions. We're not recognizing a lot of these ideologies. And one thing I would say is that, unfortunately, I think within the Western pedagogy, I think there is a lot of failure in that regards, in helping the students understand the different philosophies that are changing their perspectives. And what I mean by the different philosophies is specifically the Western philosophy, postmodernism. How is it affecting our culture? How is it affecting our well-being? How is it affecting the way we interact with one another? And most importantly, how is it affecting our vision and how we view the world? And how is it affecting the way that we are right now creating a new narrative by focusing on emotions and creating new truths, even though in postmodernism it basically considers that there's no such thing as truth, and that this whole world is really nothing but an amalgam of different absurdities connected together. So what we're seeing is that individualist society is right now really an implication of a postmodern culture. And it's really interesting. There's this theory that focuses on studying the cultural dimensions and, of course, the impact of the individual societies. And I found it really interesting, in where he would speak about the individual civilizations prioritizing the personal success and rights, as well as the necessities of oneself and immediate family, versus the collective society. He speaks of focusing on goals and well-being, and then therefore, it's always speaking of we. It's always connecting the value of relationships and loyalty more than individualist cultures. It's really interesting how this, you could even see it in different cultures, and how it manifests in the way that people relate with one another, the way that people relate with their own spirituality, and the way they relate with money, the way they relate with their goals, the way they relate with their own selves. And it's not far from what Islam actually teaches, in where it connects that the way you interact with yourself, the way you interact with the society, the way you interact with money, the way you interact with your own mental health, all of that actually affects your own spirituality. We're going to get to it, but this is just a prelude, I would say, in where with Hafid's theory, he was basically considering and speaking about how individual society intensifies our detachment from our social duties. And of course, it's really important to also mention that there are a number of different factors. Number one, yes, the individualist theories, which basically stems from the postmodern theory, and of course, the existentialism and the different new atheist, I would say, dogma, which right now we are seeing it play in our life. But there's another, I would say, culture, and there is another ideology that is affecting and intensifying this individualist theory and culture within our society, which is feminism. Feminism, especially in women's life, is affecting women, but of course, women being half the society and being, I would say, the main cornerstones within the society to making family. Feminism is right now infecting people's thinking, infecting, I would say, infecting and not affecting, because it is right now detaching women's social responsibilities from their biological one, and of course, encouraging them to pursue rules that bring them joy outside of family, outside of marriage, outside of the whole dynamic, I would say, of her biological creation. And of course, this is affecting the guys as well, in where they're finding it easier to just mate outside of marriage connections and outside of the paternal responsibilities. And then what you're seeing is that the number of feminists are asking women to take the role outside of family and to find their relationship outside of family as a way of attaining success. In other words, you could see this individualist mentality coming in words, making it seem that what it means to be successful is really to grow in the ladder of wealth, to grow in the ladder of your own self-centricity. And without us recognizing, this is actually affecting even Muslim women. Even Muslim women, they're adopting such a culture. And you could say that those ideas are becoming a very common idea, even with those that are actually adopting Islam as their way of life. But they're still influenced. Why? One of the main reasons is really because they don't recognize that in order to understand Islam, you really have to be able to distinguish it from kufr, to be able to distinguish it from the different influences that have actually probably permeated within the society. And when you look at the feminist ideologies right now, they're encouraging women to assume more leadership positions in home financing, decision making, etc. Now, such positions not only lead to a challenging dynamics of power, but they're also enabling men. And this is a very important thing. It's giving men, even though they think that it's giving women the privilege, but in reality, and in practice, it's actually giving men more privileges by getting away from their own responsibilities. It's basically allowing them to abandon responsibilities by saying, well, you wanted the power, they're fine. And that's why we're seeing the rise of single parenting. Now, individualism, we're not just going to be blaming feminism here and just individualism as the main thing, but we're trying to see the complete picture of what is affecting us as a society, what is affecting me as an individual. How am I starting to shift my views, and without me realizing, here's a very important proverb: if fish were able to see, the last thing they would notice is water. And that's the same thing. When we grow up in a society where it's affecting our subconscious mind to thinking about how we organize and what distributes the responsibilities, how we organize our relationships, the dynamics, how we define my rights and my responsibilities, how we define abuse, how we define, I would say, orbits of where you belong and where I belong. At many times, we don't recognize that there is a certain ideology, a certain culture that is really carrying a number of different ideologies are actually affecting us, where we are being taught such ideas through schools, media. Right now, they're presented as education in studies and so forth without us recognizing that they're not necessarily so subjective, but they actually come from a specific foundation, from a specific culture, which is really important to scrutinize those ideas, or you will become a product of them. And that's why Islam wants you to go up and grow beyond. Because remember, the most dhikr that a Muslim does is Allahu Akbar. Why? Because it is only when you actually recognize that your Lord Almighty is the one to be beyond all of those ideologies, that you're capable of recognizing of how, one, they're inferior, or recognizing their influences, or recognizing how they're actually pulling you down. You won't be capable of recognizing their gravity on you unless you are actually above them. That's why Islam's motto, Islam's dhikr is always Allahu Akbar. Allah is great. Because it wants you to go beyond the different ideologies, the different influences that are affecting you, that are keeping you down, and wants you to be superior beyond all of those. Not superior to mean arrogant, but superior to mean where you're connecting to the Lord Almighty and not connecting yourself to being mundane, into being just nothing but a piece of dust or a piece of mud. You're going beyond. Now, that's why when you're looking at such ideologies, you're looking at such influences, it's important to actually scrutinize them one piece after another in smaller fragments to be able to see it in a bigger picture. Let's scrutinize a little bit, focusing on the present. To get a degree, enjoy the short-term rewards is usually something that what individualism would always motivate you to do without you recognizing. Marriage, having children, and all long-term goals are basically things that people would push off. Why? Because individualism actually is blended with hedonism, in where it's all about focusing on your pleasures now. Don't worry about later. Focus on the pleasure now. Focus on trying to get yourself to getting into such success. What success? In what is presented to you as success. But in reality, what it's really pushing you to is really just focusing on your current pleasure and not the dynamics of later and your life, or the picture of your life in general. So what it would tell you to focus on is really just now, here. Don't look elsewhere. Look at yourself. Look at I. Look at me. Look at your life now. Don't look too far ahead. Now, here's one thing. When you look too far ahead, in the new atheist ideology, It basically regards that there is no purpose to life. And since it regards that there is no purpose to life, it's just now. And because of that, of course, you've got different philosophers, and especially those that would adopt such new atheist culture and the postmodern culture, exactly like John Paul Sartre, who basically would bring about this ideology of existentialism, in where bring about that that it's not purpose that preceded existence, but it's actually existence, and then you make up your purpose. Now, that is really what individualism cultivates. It's not looking at the purpose, but it's just looking at your present. And this is extremely dangerous, because if you're looking at just your present, then you're going to forget all the people around you. Then you're going to forget later. Then you're going to forget the purpose that preceded your existence. Societies that think in a long-term value, they would value family, and they would basically, it's kind of like a picture. Think of it as a camera, and where you're zooming out and you're zooming in. The second that you zoom in for a long-term goal, or zoom out in a long-term goal, you're going to see that the other picture was blurring more. And that's exactly the same way. The second that you focus on the long-term goal, you're going to see yourself as blurring out the short-term goal. And when, of course, you focus on the long-term goal, you're going to find yourself focusing on, one, being patient, two, adapting to things when things don't go according to the plan, because you are focusing on the long-term goal, which is why Islam is always taking you into a focus of focusing on al-akhirah. Don't just look at the dunya, focus on al-akhirah. And that's why it takes you to recognizing that in order for you to live morality, you have to carry in 4 different recognitions, 4 different adaptations. Number 1, recognizing justice. 2, enduring patience. 3, despite all the different things that might actually deter you away from holding on to the principle that the Lord Almighty had recognized for you, it's despite all the different offers that you would hold on to iffah, you would hold on to chastity, you would hold on to satisfaction, despite all the different offers. But that is not enough, because you also have to hold firm onto these principles in order to be courageous, to stand for justice, to stand for principles that the Lord Almighty had called for, despite all the challenges. Now that's what Islam wants you to focus on a long-term goal, despite all the different shortcoming, or all the different things that you might be living in right now. Individualism, on the other hand, promotes a liberal society that values pleasure and expects its members to conserve the natural resource that provide it. Islam wants you to focus on the akhirah, not now only. It doesn't mean that it wants you to completely forget about or completely turn a blind eye on your needs now, but it tells you to focus and endure patience and endure satisfaction and be courageous in facing all the challenges in order to hold on to justice, the principle, and certainly the purpose that you were created for and that preceded your existence. Now, here's one thing. Somebody might say, so is Islam a collective, a collectivist than an individualist? Well, here's the thing. Islam is not an individualist nor a collectivist, because if we're talking about a collective society or a collectivist, that would actually mean that Islam regards that it's the collective society, the principles that a collective society would hold on to or would regard that you're going to consider as superior to everything. The answer is Islam is not a collectivist, nor is it individualist, but certainly it is closer to collectivism than individualism. But it does not regard the society as being superior. So what is superior? It is Allahu Akbar. It is Allah Almighty that is superior and not the society. The society would certainly be as the one to guard the principle of the Lord Almighty. But if the society is not adopting the principles of the Lord Almighty to being as the center, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encouraging the individual to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their center and always as their center, even if the society detaches itself and exacerbates itself away from the principles of the Lord Almighty. Now, here's one thing. I did mention that Islam is definitely closer to a collective society than an individualist society, and for a number of different reasons. The collective society, there's an emphasis on the suppression of pleasure and gratification of the discipline that leads to a later reward. Independent societies spend more time and energy and, of course, and resources in gathering the different pleasures. And here's one thing, is that when you concentrate on saving money and reducing leisure and enjoyment, you will find yourself that you're heading towards focusing on the long-term goal compared to an individualist society that would want to cultivate a pleasure for now. Now, here's what we're seeing, on the other hand. Now, we talked about the different ideologies, but when you're looking at the implication of what is actually feeding a lot of this, I would say it's really sad, although we definitely need therapists and definitely need their support in helping the society but cultivate a healthier, I would say, mental being. But it's really sad to see that many don't recognize that a lot of the therapists, a lot of the psychology, a lot of the humanities are actually right now. I know this is going to provoke many, but I think it's important to listen to this. Again, the whole lecture is about going beyond the common culture and thinking outside of the box. What many don't recognize is that within the departments of humanity or humanities, in departments of psychology, departments of literature, departments of sociology, many are not recognizing that there is the new atheist and / postmodern culture that is right now feeding such studies. In other words, they're not completely subjective. And what we don't recognize is that many therapists are actually adopting the culture of postmodernism, feminism, liberalism, individualism, existentialism, and without us recognizing, many would actually take the therapist or psychologist or what studies within those fields are saying as if they were subjective, not recognizing that they're actually coming from a certain idea and not completely unbiased. And many are actually coming to my office, and where they would tell me, well, the therapist recommended that I would divorce because compromising is not good for my mental health. And then, of course, we would see many therapists advising their clients to leave their parents' home and saying, well, your parent is too abusive, your mother is too abusive, your siblings are too abusive, you have to move out. And of course, always the word narcissist is always there, ready to somehow give a diagnosis, even though they haven't actually met the mother, haven't actually met the father, but it would, or the brother or the sister, whatever it is, or whoever it is. But the therapists are right now always ready. This is most therapists. Let's not generalize too much. Many would have it as a ready. As a ready distant diagnose. Oh, that person is narcissist. You're speaking about a narcissist. Therefore, you are a victim. Therefore, you need to move out. And it's always prepared. It's exactly like a packaged product that you would find in the stores. You are right now have packaged diagnoses that are ready there. Just get the package and give it to the client and tell them that what they're going through is really nothing but a narcissist mother or a narcissist father that's affecting them, and that the easiest and the healthiest way to actually move on in their life, in where they just have to move out. They would have to separate themselves. And what we are seeing is an increase in depression and an increase in weakness, in more weakness in people not having the ability to adapt, to learn more new skills, and how to grow in their ability to deal and learn and deal with the people around them. And what you're seeing is that the most in common and easiest way is really to blame others and portray oneself as the victim. And of course, what you're seeing is that the implication on the individual and on the society is really the change in their aqidah. In where the aqidah and the creed right now is that I am the center of truth and principle. I choose what and who I interact with based on what makes me happy. I'm the center that determines who's poisonous and who's not. I'm the center where I would determine who I exclude, and therefore I would determine how I would change my orbit. I would determine who goes into my orbit, who's outside, and then therefore, without us recognizing, we had actually brought and cultivated in where I'm the center that limits who can use the services, share space, the things, the energy, and it's always about I. It's always about myself. And what this brought is really a lack of empathy, nothing but a selfish being, nothing but hostility within our society, in where we're always portraying ourselves as we are the victims and others are the abusers and others are the narcissists. And then therefore, the easiest way is to just move out. The easiest way is to basically create more individualist societies. And what we're seeing is a rise in depression, a rise in mental health issues, and a rise. Why? Well, one of the things that many would want to, I would say, avoid in talking about is really how the new atheist movement, how the feminist movement, and how the individualist philosophy had actually cultivated all of this. But it's always accusing the society, always blaming the society. Why? Because it wants to bring in that it's collectivism that is the blame and not individualism that is the blame. So it's always, let's accuse others of being responsible, many not recognizing, of course, the significance of such philosophies in a person's faith. physical health, mental health, and even the social dynamics. And what we're seeing is you're separating yourself from family, separating yourself by moving away and making the decision to not get married, not have family, and portraying the family as if it's always abusive. And of course, the gurus who emerge from the postmodern individualist dogmas are now responsible for the fact that you cannot compromise with your family and instead opt out to be part of a small group. And here's the thing, that I would say the new gurus right now are those that actually come from those departments that adopted the dogmas of individualism and adopted the dogmas of new atheism, postmodernism, feminism, liberalism. All these different ideologies are right now presented as if they were education, as if this is what studies cite, as if this is what the latest advanced information that man had come to recognize is really such ideologies or such cultures. It's really sad that the new gurus right now, that I would say many and the departments of psychology or departments of it's, please don't misunderstand me. Please don't misunderstand me and think that I'm here just to, anybody that studied psychology is going to be adopting such ideas. I'm just trying to take one thing, is that fly outside of the flock, and don't be like that fish that the last thing it notices is the water that surrounds it. What we are seeing is extremely dangerous. What we are seeing is an increase in more depression, more problems within our society that were not there before. We're seeing abilities regress in being able to adapt, in being able to have social skills. And it's always bringing in our youth to seeing and thinking, I just have to move out. I can't handle this. It's not something that I'm able to do. So how does Islam view individualism? Well, a number of different things to say about here. Islam regards that you have within your DNA, within your creation, a fitra. What is a fitra? Al-fitra is an instinct. Al-fitra is a program within you that you may not recognize, but you cannot actually go outside of it. Well, the second that you go outside of that program is the second that you will actually go outside of what is good for you. When you go outside of what is good for you, outside of that program, you would think that you're doing the right thing. But the truth of the matter is that you cannot necessarily just change the program, because the program was already set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is basically the instinct. It's a biological creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within you. It's a system in your brain. It's a system in your body. It's not just a system within your DNA, but it's also the same dynamic within your society. You cannot separate yourself away from it and think that, well, I'm going to be different. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you that there is an instinct. Fitrat Allah, it's basically fatara an-nas alayha. It's the instinct, it's the creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in people. There's la tabdila li khalqillah. You're not going to be capable of changing the creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created people in. You cannot change the facts and the truth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within you. You can't recreate a new truth by thinking that I could just create a narrative and just bring about a new truth. If you are created male, you are male. This is a fact. From your DNA, from the whole anatomy, the brain, it's not just a reproductive system. It's not about let's inject new injections and maybe we can change the fact of what we are and the social relations and the social dynamic. No, you can't do that. You're going against yourself. The second you go against yourself, you go against the truth of the matter that the Lord Almighty created you in a certain dynamic, in a certain foundation, to play a certain social responsibility, to do a certain purpose, to be tested for a purpose that was created before your existence. And that is what fitrah is. In Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and look at that acronym that I put out there, the DNAIM. What is that? It's not something that I invented, but they're actually called maqasid al-sharia, or the legal maxims in Islam. What are those? In Islam, there are 5 main things that act as the legal maxims or the principles, or let's call them the laws of priority in your life. D is basically standing for deen, which means your religion, your vision. What is your vision based on? In Islam, your vision, the center is not yourself, but the center is really the Lord Almighty. Nothing goes superior to the Lord Almighty. That's what the D or the deen stands for. Number 2, which is N, standing for nafs, in where it's your life. The preservation of your life and the preservation of life in general is the second need, in where to preserve your life, to preserve your health, is actually the second superior thing after the superiority of the Lord Almighty. A, mental health, aql, having that healthy mental stability. But how do we actually cultivate our mental health? How do we cultivate a good, sound mind? Well, that's why Islam regards that things that would intoxicate the mind, whether we're talking about drinking, that is alcohol drinking, or whether we're talking about drugs, or even thoughts that might take away your vision from being centered around the Lord Almighty, as being something that is actually an intoxicant. So intoxicants are not necessarily only in probably alcohol or drugs, but intoxicants can also be in thoughts that take you away from the purpose that the Lord Almighty had actually asked you to be centered around, which is Allahu Akbar, that the Lord Almighty is the center. The center, that the Lord Almighty be in the center, and that the purpose is the hereafter. Number 4, I, stands for hird, or chastity and family. Chastity and family are things that Islam considers as part of the legal maxims that you cannot separate yourself away from. And that's why Islam regards that وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and that Lord Almighty had decreed that you would only worship Him Almighty, and you would act in kindness to your family, or to your parents, to be exact. What about my parents? What about the rest of the family? The Lord Almighty tells you that you can't just separate yourself away from your family. So what do I do? How do I deal with my family when they're actually abusive? Allah Almighty says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. He orders, that the Lord Almighty orders for al-adl wal-ihsan, justice and piety. Justice is definitely great, but justice is not the highest thing that you could do. But there's something else, which is piety, which is to give in, which is to compromise, even when justice is not attainable. There's something even higher than justice, which is to give in and compromise and give in good, even when others are not acting in accordance with the principles of justice. So what do? إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى. Give in, even for the relatives, the family. But what if they're abusive? Well, the least that you could do, وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. And He, that is the Lord Almighty, forbids aggression, transgression, and certainly oppression. That's the least that you could do. In other words, it's basically teaching us to live the principle rather in living our own feelings and our own emotions to determine how we deal with the world around us. Islam tells us that you're not going to be impulsive, rather that you're going to be living and embracing the principle of the Lord Almighty, because in being impulsive, you're living an individualist person. In living the principle of the Lord Almighty, you're taking away your emotions from determining your behavior to letting the principle of the Lord Almighty determine what it means to live morals and what it means to be ethical. You're putting the superiority, you're considering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is superior to your own individual, is superior to your own emotions, is superior, even if that actually means I would embrace my mother and father that probably did not act in the best way with me. What does that mean? Well, the Lord Almighty teaches us, وَإِنْ جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَى أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Even if your parents went not only against your own rights, but even if they had trespassed the rights of the Lord Almighty and abused you in a way to go outside of regarding your Lord Almighty as superior. In other words, they abused you because you adopted Islam. They abused you because you adopted the principles of the Lord Almighty. Islam teaches you, now you only have one choice. صاحبهما في الدنيا معروفة. You still have to act and relate with them based on the principles of the Lord Almighty, which is kindly with your parents. You're not going to be impulsive and think, I could just move out. That's better for my mental health. That's better for my mental well-being. Islam tells you, no. Even if somebody tells you that studies say that this is what you have to do, we would say, what? This is actually contradicting what the Lord Almighty had asked you to do. Therefore, such a study is actually needing a revision. Such a study is not aware. أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Isn't the one that created and put in your own fitra, your own instinct, your own biology, created you from A to Z, more aware and has the deepest knowledge in what is best for you? You cannot separate yourself from a certain orbit, the center of that orbit. Think of it as exactly like the atom, in where you've got the center, you've got the nucleus on the inside. The Lord Almighty is your nucleus. That's the main gravity. In the first orbit, your mother and father. You cannot separate yourself away from them. Number 3, your family. You've got that orbit. That's the reality. There are certain orbits that you just have to learn how to adapt, how to compromise, how to bring about the principle despite the challenges. Remember the 4 different categories that we talked about: recognizing the principle, enduring patience, living that satisfaction despite all the offerings that might be there, and number 4, being courageous to hold on to the principle despite all the different challenges. Islam presents the story of the human well-being in the story of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about Prophet Adam alayhi salam. إِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. When the Lord Almighty had told the angels, I would be creating a vicegerent. And they wondered, the angels wondered, are you going to create a being, another creature that's going to cause bloodshed on earth? Now, here's one thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching them and that this being actually has what you don't have, angels. This being has a potential to think, the potential to process ideas and even have free will. Now, these 2 sides are important because when you're looking at the fitrah, those 2 sides, which is intellect and also free will, those 2 points are important to actually think of Adam alayhi salam, and Adam represents you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the first piece of Adam alayhi salam, after eating from the tree and after all of that, he says, now you recognize, فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُم مِّنِّي هُدًى فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا يَضِلُّ وَلَا يَشْقَى. If once you recognize your potential with intellect, once you recognize that there's one thing, it's trying to set the foot on guidance. If you follow the guidance, if you follow that fitrah, that instinct that the Lord Almighty created within you, then you would not be living in a delusion. فَلَا يَضِلُّ. You would not be living in a delusion. وَلَا يَشْقَى. And you should not be living in a shaqa. What is a shaqa? A shaqa, it is depression. A shaqa is living in a mental instability. That's a shaqa. So when you're looking at what it means to actually live I, and what it means to live myself, and what it means to actually have the mental well-being, it's to live in one based on fitrah. You gotta first figure out what is your instinct. What are you created in? That's the first thing. If you really want to find a mental well-being, you first have to figure out what you are. You still have to figure out, that's the foundation. You still have to figure out what you are, who you are first. Number 2, then you got to figure out the path that you're living in, which is guidance. If you don't find guidance, that what you're going to be living in is nothing but turbulences and a delusion. And that's why you got within guidance. What guidance am I talking about? And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Uskun anta wa zawjuk. Uskun anta wa zawjuk al-Jannah. I want you to dwell inside that garden. But what does it mean to dwell? A second is tranquility. And I want you to see one very important thing here. Yes, you're recognizing yourself. 2, you're recognizing the guidance, but there's number 3, which is important. He was asked to dwell with his wife. In other words, it's not enough to recognize your fitrah and your instinct and your biological creation. It's not enough to recognize guidance, but there's another piece that you may not recognize, which is the importance of relating with the social orbit. It's part of your fitrah. You can't separate yourself from their social dynamic. That's why he said, Uskun anta wa zawjuk. It's dwell in that garden with your wife, because that's going to bring in tranquility. To live as an individual is not going to be bringing you into second, into tranquility, because you're actually contradicting the main pieces of what would actually bring you that second. The word is second, number 4. And then he says, وَكُلَا مِنْهَا حَيْثُ شِئْتُمْ رَغَدًا. And you've got the different areas to eat from. You've got the different resources. Those different resources, if you are just focusing on the resources, but you're not focusing on the principles, not priorities, but the principles that the Lord Almighty had taught you how to choose from amongst those resources, then you're going to be living in another challenge. So that's why, remember the DNA I am right there. Those are exactly those laid out pieces of it. And that's why when you're talking about, it says, وَلَا تَقْرَبَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةِ, and don't get close to this tree. In other words, this is a metaphor, not to get close to it, to mean keep away from taking a resource that doesn't belong to you. In other words, recognizing the resources is actually part of not feeding the individual, but recognizing the resources is actually part of what gives you the ability to distinguish your path. Recognizing your resources is to bring about stability. Recognizing your priorities is important to recognizing your priorities, is important to recognizing where you're heading, what to leave and what to take. Recognizing who you are is recognizing your purpose. Those points, those factors are important to bring about that mental well-being. That healthy well-being is basically in order to redirect your nature to being a human nature. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was always focusing on what makes us as human. And what makes us as human is important. It's taking us, redirecting us to our human nature, and rather than taking us outside of human nature. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes those that would depart away from the principles of the Lord Almighty. And He says, "In hum kal an'ami bal hum adal." That they are exactly like the herds, exactly like the animals. In fact, they're actually deluded even more. Why? Because they had the intellect, but couldn't use their intellect to recognize, one, their creation, their instinct, their fitrah; two, their principle; three, their guidance; and four, recognizing what actually is the right resource for them to help them live in stability. And how did we actually how did we get into this situation in where we're confusing our own creation, in where we're putting in a new definition of what makes human, what makes female, what makes male, what makes you, what makes I, what makes our principle, what all of these different things. You're seeing that redirection of human nature in media, the school system, cultivating a new postmodern culture, new atheism, and of course, what we're not recognizing is we are seeing that the society is making a new definition of each and every single one of those, a redefinition of what is human, a redefinition of what is ethical and what is principle, a redefinition of the resources, a redefinition of your priorities, a redefinition of your goals and purposes. And what we're seeing is that we're actually getting away from our human nature farther than ever before in the age of what it presents itself as the age of science. This is probably the biggest regression in human history. The biggest regression in human history, in where we claimed to use science and use intellect. We claim to adopt intellect in order to gain a better understanding of our humanity, gain a better understanding of our guidance, our purpose, etc. But what we had actually gone into is the worst regression in human history, creating a narrative I would say, an amalgam of different delusion after delusion after delusion, and claiming that this is what science had actually presented. What should we consider? Let's just summarize what we were talking about really quick. Principles of Sharia, deen, spirituality, nafs, ird, chastity, aql, mind, mal, wealth. In Islam, the most important reason and the most important center is to cultivate your deen, the priorities. How to maintain deen. How do I maintain my deen? How do I maintain my spirituality? Number one, seek knowledge, seek ilm to understand your Islam. Stay away from misconceptions, and of course, stay away from those that would pass out those misconceptions. How to maintain your faith, how to maintain your deen in place, to make sure you've got the main center in place. Know that there are two enemies to you. Number one, which is the world and the body gravity. Those are things that might actually take you away from focusing on your spirituality to focusing on your body, and without you recognizing, such a deterred focus away from the reality is actually meant to let you focus on resources, on individualism, rather than focus on the purpose. That's the main thing. If you're focusing on just feeding your body, then you're just focusing on individualism. But if you're focusing on your spirituality, then you're focusing on the purpose that preceded your existence. How do I grow in my own spirituality? The word is dhikr. What is dhikr? Dhikr is farther than just a word, or let's call it a Sufi word that many would like to think of it as. Dhikr is not a Sufi word. Dhikr is actually the center of what the Quran is telling you, that a spirituality, a way to grow in your religion, a way to grow in your self, your inner self, a way to grow in from connecting yourself from the inside to the Lord Almighty, connecting yourself to who you really are, connecting yourself from within, because happiness, stability, and mental well-being is from the inside. It's not from the outside. We're living in a society that's telling you to focus on the outside, nourishing your skin, nourishing and all the plastic surgeries and all those different, all of these different, I would say, capitalist society. It's all about cultivating the outside. But Islam tells you, when you look into the mirror, the sunnah is to say, Ya Allah, I ask you to perfect my inside morality, the inner self of myself, as you had perfected my appearance. perfected my appearance? Yes. Islam tells you, don't worry, your outside is looking great. I want you to focus on the inside. So Islam tells you, when you look at the I, myself, and that means, it's looking at your morals on the inside. It's feeding your spirituality. It's cultivating your inner well-being. It's growing in your dhikr. What is dhikr? Dhikr actually means to mention, but this is not just to mention, but this is to actually cultivate a reminder of what is on the inside of you, in where you're connecting yourself with the principle of the Lord Almighty. You're connecting yourself orally, constantly. Say it in your own words. Allah is my Lord. Allah is my center. Say it in your words so it can vibrate into your heart. Say it in your words till you tear from it with your eyes. Say it again and again till your body practices it in action. Say it again and again till it grows to give you a better vision of how you see the world in its realities, with no manipulation that deter you away from recognizing the truth of all the matters. Say it to grow in your inside, to grow in the light that sheds a better vision on the inside. Say it till your steps, your words, your eyes, your ears are all speaking of light. Say it and keep on saying that dhikr till you grow to actually become a person of ihsan, a person that is saying, hatta, remember, as in the hadith, in where, what does it mean to live ihsan? أن تعبد الله كأنك ترى. It's to worship Allah as if you could see Allah. For if you cannot see Allah, remember that He can see you. That's how you grow within yourself. Once you grow within yourself, once you learn how to control the body, that's when you will be capable of getting into growing your inside. That's why, remember in that hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, when Jibreel alayhi salam came to him and he was sitting down amongst the Sahaba, but the Sahaba, the companions, didn't know who this person was. They didn't know who this person is. He just comes in and the Sahaba are really saying, well, we had never seen him before. And the influence or the impact of journey is certainly not visible on him. But then he would sit in front of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and he said, Ya Muhammad, akhbirni an al-Islam. Oh Muhammad, tell me about Islam. And he tells him, it's to worship the Lord Almighty, to bear witness that there's no God worthy of worship but the Lord Almighty, to perform the prayers, to perform zakah, and give charity, and to live and fast of days of Ramadan and do Hajj. But that was just a start. That was just a couple actions to do. But that's not enough. So then he would tell him, you're right. But the companions are living around and they're sitting around and they're confused as to, well, who is the teacher here? He's correcting him and he's asking him questions. And who's the teacher here? Who's demonstrating what? So then he basically asks him again and he says, well, tell me about faith. And he says, it's basically to worship the Lord Almighty, to believe in the Lord Almighty, to believe in the angels, to believe in the books, and to believe in the hereafter. And then when you look at that, that's basically to tell you that it's the start of your faith is to put in and cultivate a certain action to help you focus on the heart. That's a second level. Learn how to focus on your action. If you're capable of disciplining your behavior, you're going to be then seeing that after the control of your behavior comes the ability to control your heart, the ability to control your spirit. You're going to see it fruiting into recognizing farther than just a principle. You're going to be recognizing what usually is unseen to people. It doesn't mean you're going to be seeing angels by all means, but it just means you're going to be recognizing the powers that the Lord Almighty had actually instilled in all the world around you. You're going to be having a better focus than on the I, myself. You're going to be focusing on really the purpose of your own existence. You're going to be seeing beyond your body. You're going to be able to see you on the inside. When you say I and myself, what are you on the inside? What is your purpose in life? Why were you created? That's the most important thing about I and myself. Where are you heading in life? Now that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the most important, shortest surah, in which is when you look at, going to go just because of time, the surah in where you look at the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the last surah ever to revealed, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. وَالْعَصْرِ, in where it's giving you here by the time of Asr, by the time that sun sets. Verily all man is in loss, except those that had nurtured faith and piety and good action, and they held on. Two things, tawasaw bil-haq wa tawasaw bil-sabr. They held on to the principle of truth. And it's not enough to hold on to the principle of truth, but you also need supporters. Tawasaw bil-haq wa tawasaw bil-sabr. They supported one another on truth. They needed community to support them on truth and support them on patience. Now, when you look at self-centricity in Islam, it regards that self-centricity is actually the mother of all evils, the mother of one in where even during the story of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, what led Iblis to refuse to obey the order of the Lord Almighty and the command of the Lord Almighty is that Iblis said, Ana khayrun minhu, I'm better than him. You created me from fire or gas, and you created him from clay. So therefore, I am better. That individualist vision is actually not only the mother of evils from before even the creation of man, but that's also the mother of evils, and where the centricity of Qabil and Habil, when Qabil kills Habil, and he regards that, well, لئن بسطت إلي يدك لتقتلني ما أنا بباسط يدي إليك لأقتلك. Said, if you're going to kill me, I'm not going to reach out and kill you. What happened? Well, his focus was إني أخاف الله رب العالمين. I fear the Lord Almighty. Now that centricity, that self-centricity to have Qabil kill Habil was because he regarded, well, why is he more important? How come he gets the resources of getting married to the other sister? How come he gets the resources? How come he gets the acceptance and not me? That led him to killing to committing the first crime ever. Self-centricity led the Pharaoh to abusing others with injustice, and where he basically said, "Ana rabbukum al-a'la," I'm the highest Lord here. I'm the one to be in the highest command. And then later, the Quran would also tell us in where that man that basically also practiced, and where in Surah Al-Kahf, he was telling him that, well, what I am getting, the resources that I have are basically proving I'm doing the right thing. And therefore, I should be probably, in fact, not probably, but I should be also getting a better resource, a better consequence than you. Because if I have it in this life, therefore, I should have it in the hereafter, if there is a hereafter after all. That's what he regarded. Not recognize that not having the resource is not an evidence of actually being at a better place. Self-centricity leads to selfishness and not thinking about others' pains and struggles, and therefore leads to recognizing one's responsibilities towards others. And of course, we can't forget Gaza in this. When we're talking about this issue, we're seeing how right now the self-centricity and how not recognizing 29,000 people being killed in Gaza becomes not recognized within the Western politics. Yes, many within the society, within the population, I would say, are recognizing that, but you could see that the politics is turning a complete blind eye. Why? Because right now Israel is nothing but an economical resource for the US, for UK, for Canada, and turn a blind eye on principle. As long as it brings in the money, brings in authority, brings in power, who cares about justice? Let's work on the double standard. Those would be dehumanized. Those would be dehumanized as, well, we're going to bring about this October 7th card and just say that Israel is just retaliating. And of course, it would basically represent right there not thinking about not all those casualties, not all those civilians, not all those innocent children, that just thinking about what they're going through, in where right now starve and really die of thirst, and demolishing hospitals, demolishing every single thing that may give these people a life. Could say in politics that that's basically that self-centricity of what we're actually seeing. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was teaching us that what it means to be an ummah is to actually be a person of faith, a person that has a heart to feel others' pains. And that's why the Prophet, peace be upon him, in that story when that man that was described as a Arabi, or an Arabi to be exact. An Arabi is like a Bedouin. And then when he basically urinates in the masjid, literally urinates in the masjid. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he just said, when all the other companions, they wanted to stop him, and he said, let him finish. Let him finish his business. Let him finish his nature right there. Once he's done, just bring a bucket of water and pour it over it. But the man, he said, oh Allah, shed your mercy on me and Muhammad, and don't shed your mercy on any of those people. But the Prophet ﷺ tells him, لَقَدْ حَجَّرْتَ وَاسِعًا. You basically narrowed down the mercy of the Lord Almighty that is very expansive. That's where the Prophet ﷺ is teaching that man and teaching all of us that it actually is beyond our own selves to just think of ourselves as wanting to be the only ones to succeed even in the hereafter. But we would have to be expansive in where include and feel with others. Yes, include others in your mercy. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us not to say I, even if it was a knock at the door. Jabir ibn Abdullah, he said, I came to the Prophet ﷺ and knocked at the door. And he said, who's there? And he said, I. He kept on saying, who's there? I was like, it's me. But the Prophet ﷺ hated that. There's that focus of centricity. He hated it. And that's why, because it's to teach us, don't think of just yourself as the center. Go beyond. Even if it's a knock at the door. Anywhere. When you could see, what does avoiding that I and myself take us into? Well, it takes us, brings in a soft heart and creates a nation with one heart and one body. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا. When the Lord Almighty said, and remember the blessings of your Lord Almighty when you were an enemy to one another. And then the Lord Almighty had cultivated mercy, affection between your hearts, and you had become brethren to one another. Now that's why the Prophet, peace be upon him, teaches us that a good example for an ummah and what makes a nation is that he had given an example of their own affection to one another as one body. If one piece of it or one limb of it would complain of any illness, the rest of the body would stay awake throughout the night with fever and even insomnia to keep it awake in order to get things in place. It's one ummah, one body. You will not recognize yourself till you recognize others' pains and you are there for them. The Prophet ﷺ was sitting with the Sahaba and he said, which of you had actually started their day fasting? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, me. He said, which of you today followed a funeral? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, I did. Then the Prophet, peace be upon him, asked, which of you fed a needy person? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, I did. He said, which of you had actually visited an ill person? He said, I did. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, whoever does all of these things, and it's within one person, the Lord Almighty lets them enter Jannah. You might say, well, here's Abu Bakr as-Siddiq actually saying, I, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't hate it and didn't scold him. Al-Badri explains that was really to answer the question right there. But the Prophet ﷺ, I want you to look at that in where he said, well, who was fasting today? Who followed a funeral? Who fed a needy person? Who was there to be there for others, basically? Being there for others is the way to cultivate yourself. To think that if you separate yourself from others, that's focusing on your mental well-being is actually wrong in Islam. To bring about a mental well-being, being an ummah, is a way of attaining spirituality. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You were the best of the nations that were presented to the people, but on a condition. You would order for what is good and forbid what is evil. Why? Because at the end, the ummah, it's all about if you worship the Lord Almighty. What does it mean to worship the Lord Almighty? It means to regard the Lord Almighty as superior to yourself. What does it mean to worship the Lord Almighty? It means to regard the Lord Almighty's principle as the principles that you center around, not your impulsivity, not your emotions. What does it mean to actually regard that? It's basically to mean that you're going to consider that Allah Almighty is Allahu Akbar, that you regard the Lord Almighty as the one that you would turn to. Remember, the word ummah appeared in the Quran 47 times. Prophet Ibrahim عليه السلام said, ربنا وجعلنا مسلمين لك ومن ذريتنا أمة مسلمة لك. O Lord Almighty, make us a nation. You would not be a nation if you were thinking of yourself just as an individual. You got to include yourself to be yourself part of the nation. You have to feed yourself to have that separation from selfishness, to feel the pain of others, to feel as being part of the rest of the ummah, in order to regard yourself as actually part of those that would remember the word of Allahu Akbar. I'll end it right here, inshallah, to answer the questions, and inshallah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all for listening, and reward you all for being patient in allowing me, I would say, to rejuvenate after a whole month and a half of being away from teaching myself, I would say, and living these words. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make myself and all of us be those that would center around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the light to see the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make us from those that would cultivate and teach others about the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make us from those that would always be surrounded around the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make us from those that will teach the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make us from those that would separate from their individualist, selfish self to growing into recognizing others and recognizing others' pains and being there to support justice. As the Prophet ﷺ, in the dua, he would always make a dua. اللهم إني أسألك فعل الخيرات وترك المنكرات وحب المساكين. O Lord, I ask you to guide me to doing what is right. Right is righteous. And to leave what is evil, and to love the needy. Allahumma ameen. Go ahead, my dear.
Ameen to the beautiful du'as. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Aysha, for the amazingly beneficial session, for so eloquently highlighting the issues and challenges that we're facing and seeing, and also highlighting so eloquently how Islam gives us that light. So Jazakallah khairan. I'm seeing mashallah, lots of comments coming in as well, and lots of reactions. Alhamdulillah. We do have a few questions here. Inshallah, I can read them out, and we'll also paste them in the chat so that you and others can also read it as well. So we'll start with a bit of a personal experience kind of question we have from someone here. They are saying, Assalamu alaikum Shaykha, regarding human well-being, how can a Muslim recover from a mental health issue that has been staying permanently from childhood abuse? So physically and mentally, for example, constantly being hit by hard objects since early age 6, trauma also of a parent committing suicide, financially abused by the parent taking away the inheritance, being put in a foster home, and they're sharing some different experiences here. We've pasted it in the chat as well. So they're saying they're facing this abuse and suffering from PTSD as a result of all this, and social anxiety and other things. So they're asking, how can a Muslim recover from this?
Beautiful question. And I think it's important that they actually ask that question. By me, I would say probably many are going to understand it as if I'm attacking the Department of Psychology and all those that work within that field. I would like to make sure that I'm not misunderstood. I think it's important to actually learn from that. And of course, al-hikmah dallatul mu'min, learn from those departments what is good. And but it's important to it's important to consider Islam as the main vision. So definitely, if the person is actually going through all of that, I would definitely recommend seeing a Muslim therapist. And the reason why I'm saying a Muslim therapist, because I'm hoping that inshallah a Muslim therapist would actually take Islam as the focus, as the center, as the foundation to helping that Muslim grow outside of the trauma or outside of probably the abuse or even the PTSD that they might have actually lived through. And definitely, Muslim therapists, inshallah, would probably be a great resource to help that person heal and get the therapy that is needed. So the therapist would definitely have a better answer to how they could grow in that situation if we're talking about such an expansive, let's say it that way, and such a deep situation. So definitely I would recommend going and seeing Muslim therapist, not a non-Muslim therapist. So definitely see that. The other part is that in Islam, um, from the Islamic point of view, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيِّهِ سُلْطَانًا فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. Now this is important. In Islam, it tells you that whoever was killed in an oppressive manner, that the Lord Almighty would grant those that would be their person's guardians, that is the victim's guardians, some authority, and therefore they should not misuse or abuse that authority. What does that actually mean? Well, we're not just talking about killing here, but we're actually talking about any abuse that you might actually have faced. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate you for the patience. There is no way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let injustice prevail. The compensation would actually be so so significant and so big that the Lord Almighty had emphasized that one should not abuse such a compensation, because it might actually be it might actually be something that would be so big that it might provoke others to misuse that authority and misuse such privileges. So what I would say is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, that He would tell you that He is bringing you glad tidings. So if you were to endure any type of a trauma, any type of abuse, any type of hardship, the Lord Almighty would, one, compensate you. So in other words, look for the potential that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you that you may not recognize, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you there is a potential. Number two is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had reminded us always that وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, that there's always going to be not only a compensation in this life, but also in the hereafter. So in other words, don't think of injustice as always going to be prevalent, but there is justice where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the compensation. And number three, in order to be able to grow strong in your ability of endurance, in your patience, it's important to connect to dhikr, and the right dhikr. What does it mean to connect to dhikr? It's basically to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to help you connect with Allah. Means that you connect with the dhikr, and where, for example, if you're feeling that you are weak, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Connect yourself with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, even when Prophet Nuh alayhi salam was feeling that he was rejected, and for 950 years doing da'wah, he said, Inni maghlubun fantasar. Ya Allah, I'm here, overcome with all of their powers. Fantasar, you give the victory. And that's the same thing. In where in Islam, you connect yourself with dhikr in order to give you the capacity, to give you the potential to be able to endure, to be able to grow in your power, to be able to redirect your focus from focusing on pain to focusing on gain, from focusing on the person that abused you, from focusing on the pain to focusing on the one that is capable of uplifting all pains. That's why if you're going through poverty, Ya Razaq, Ya Allah, you're the one that gives rizq. If you're going through probably trauma of probably cancer or an illness, Allahumma anta shafi, Ya Allah, you're the one that grants cure, etc. You're redirecting your focus from focusing on the pain to focusing on the Lord Almighty, who's capable of redirecting your focus from the focus on pain to focusing on the power that is capable of changing all the pains and changing all the direction of powers as well, and redirecting everything in this life. In other words, you're growing in your perspective from focusing on one corner to focusing on the bigger picture, which is the power of Allahu Akbar. I hope I answered that one.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Aysha, for that incredibly detailed and beneficial answer. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, the sister benefits and is able to get the help and benefit from the nasiha you've given. Jazakallah khairan. We have another great question here. I'm going to paste it in the chat, inshallah. The sister saying, thank you so much for your extremely illuminating talk. So much of the phenomena you mentioned of today's liberal individualistic society is what I have seen within myself and my circles. What are some practical ways that we can balance and unlearn this society when we have grown up in it? How do you recommend we address those we know who have pulled away from their families, communities, and anyone else who disagrees with them to seek out people who share the same liberal ideology? And how can we protect our children from falling into this trap? So, mashallah, quite a few questions here, but yeah, very important. Jazakallah khairan.
I must admit, I am so proud of those that are attending. I could see that they were very tentative. I could see, mashallah, I could see smart girls and smart women here that will be leading, inshallah, within our community. A couple of things to answer in this question. Number one is that it's important to recognize, like never before, although yes, there is a rise in I would say that individualist, new atheist, postmodern, feminist, etc., different ideologies in how they're penetrating our ideas and penetrating even our education system. But at the same time, like never before, we're also seeing new activists, new Muslim activists, and let me call them Muslim activists, even though they would like to be presented as da'iyas, all right? But I would say we're seeing new faces, young men and women that are right now doing a magnificent and an outstanding job in bringing about awareness like never before. I mean, if we were to go back in the 80s and the early 90s and in the 90s, a lot of those voices and a lot of those awarenesses were not actually there. So I'm actually very optimistic. I don't want to be pessimistic at all. I'm very optimistic that that there are resources to learn from. There are resources, they're available on YouTube. Take the time to learn from those circles, take the time to learn from those lectures. We've got so many different great speakers right now that are scrutinizing, and I would say that have the courage to scrutinize the Western culture right now, the postmodern culture and its dangers, the feminist culture and etc. And we're seeing voices for very aware, very enlightened brothers and sisters that are doing an excellent job. So continue that, learn from them, learn what is good, and learn how to teach it to others as well. And most importantly, you have to remember, You cannot be a Muslim and be coward. Don't be afraid to say what is haqq. Don't be afraid. Remember, all the stories of all the prophets were really to tell us that's how the story began. How do you continue the story? The story of objection to the da'wah, the story of those that rejected da'wah. This is not a new story. This is the story that you will face from those that will hear you saying the truth. Don't weaken. Don't be afraid. You're going to find people that are going to make you doubt yourself. Truth is so clear and so apparent, but they're going to put in all these narratives to create new truths till you doubt yourself. And they will use all these methods, exactly like how Prophet Lut alayhi salam, when he was calling in for that correction of behavior, and what they eventually said, أخرجوهم من قريتكم, expel them out of the country. Why? To them, it was a crime to seek purification. And what was a norm was to actually be contaminated by their culture. If you were to speak otherwise, you would be accused of so many different things, whether it's terror, whether it's all these different labels, or probably a label of right now you could say all the different ways to dehumanize and to make it seem like it's actually justifiable to use any way of harming that person, because they would easily strip them away from their own humanity, exactly like Gaza, in where even children, they're telling you, well, they should have left. Are you serious? It's exactly the same way in where the story of the prophets was always there in order to tell you, listen, don't be afraid. And remember, you will face an objection. And remember that the prophets throughout history were actually facing all of this in order to stay and be a nation, even when you're alone. When you're alone, remember, Allah is with you. If Allah is with you, that's all you need. That's all you need. When everyone else is basically calling for a narrative of delusion, don't be afraid. Learn and speak it. Connect yourself through Quran. Connect yourself to ilm. Ilm and knowledge is the only way to help you identify delusion, manipulation, and a narrative that is nothing but putting in a delusion to keep people away from truth. So ilm is your key. You have to connect yourself to learning Islam. If you are not learning Islam, then you're going to be fed, and literally spoon-fed. We're right now being fed all this misinformation from our early childhood. Cartoons, video games, schools, and the list goes on. And without us recognizing, social media is right now also coming in to cultivate all of this. So in order to grow, you have to learn where these I would say contaminants are coming from. You have to learn how to self-discipline yourself and close them off and isolate yourself from them. 2, how to connect yourself. Because remember, there's takhliya and there's tahliya. You have to, before you start furnishing your home, you have to first empty your home from the different contaminants, from the different things that are keeping your home messy. And that's the same thing. La ilaha illallah starts out with la ilaha. There's no God worthy of worship but Allah. Take away first all the different wrong ideologies that are contaminating your mind, and then you'll be capable of recognizing illallah, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Take away all the contaminants, recognize the contaminants, and then take them away. Separate yourself away from it, and then you'll be able to embrace truth. You'll be able to embrace all the light out there. Assalamu alaikum. I hope is there another question?
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Aysha. We have, mashallah, lots of questions coming in here, but I just want to be mindful, inshallah, of the time as well, of your time, and also because we do have quite a few lectures starting in person in some of the locations now. So inshallah, if it's all right, maybe we can collect some of these questions and share them with you afterwards as well, if that's all right. Or would you like to go through one more question?
Let's take some more questions as time permits. I'll make the story short.
All right, inshallah. I have one question here. I can paste it in the chat. So the sister is saying, I've heard many women argue working and serving in the workforce in meaningful positions can improve society and provide greater long-term benefit than being mothers or wives, since they could potentially benefit a larger population instead of however many kids they have. How do we respond to this?
I do actually have a whole lecture on feminism. So go to YouTube, feminism, Aysha Wazwaz, type in my name. I do have a whole detailed lecture on that and where feminism comes from and the indoctrination of feminism. And I think I called it, feminism and I forgot what I called it, but look it up. I hopefully, inshallah, that would actually answer that one in detail, because feminism, it's a whole ideology, and I think it's really hard to just summarize it in one sentence. But feminism is really needing a lot of scrutiny, and I think what many sisters don't recognize is that it had really penetrated even the Muslim circles, and I would like to emphasize on that. Even the Muslim circles are right now embracing the feminist narrative without them recognizing and putting literally a halal label on it. And this is extremely dangerous, because the second that you've got pork and you put a halal label on it, and many people are not experts in, even if, let's use this example right there. Many people are not experts in farming and meat, and they won't recognize that this is actually not the real right meat. And that's the same thing in where many times people are manipulated by the appearance of a hijabi sister, for example, that's speaking about women's rights and women's roles and how to live a healthy Muslim female lifestyle, whatever it is. And when in reality, it's exactly like that halal label on pork. And many times, many sisters, the hijab might actually be, I would say, deceiving, in where they would think that, okay, she's giving me a Muslim, the Muslim idea of how to live a productive female within the society, and without many recognizing that there is a lot of feminist narratives really embedded within this talk. So I think it's really important to refer to that lecture. I think it's going to be helpful, inshallah, in order to make it as a start of recognizing the foundation of where Islam and feminism meet and depart, let's say it that way, and not depend on the many hijabi sisters that are adopting the feminist narrative without them recognizing. And I think it's important to have the ilm and be able to recognize the foundations before we talk about the implications. Inshallah. Hopefully, inshallah, that would actually be a resource to lead them to, inshallah, learning more about that.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Aysha, for that answer. Inshallah, we'll take one last question here, and I think it's a good one to end off of here. And this question is actually coming from the Saskatoon sisters. They had logged in and done a live stream from their campus live, alhamdulillah. So I'll paste this in the chat here. And their question was, what is the best way that you would advise Muslim women to start learning their deen? There are so many courses and so many books out there, but where do we start?
Well, I think it's important to actually take a program and really, be involved in a program and not just take individual lectures here and there. I guess I could also announce that Gems of Light is also launching a program for Islamic studies. You can actually Google that, gemsoflight.org, and also join different programs as well, in where with these programs, you're actually taking it, kind of like a slice of a cake. You're taking it bit by bit rather than taking little pieces out here and there. Because when you're taking a program in a course or courses, that'll probably enable you, one, to continue to get a degree, and the degree and the object for the degree is not necessarily to get a degree to probably use to work, but it's to really make sure that you are completing the different sides to having the Muslim vision. Okay, so this is important whether you're studying Islamic studies and specializing in one particular topic, or whether you're studying Islamic studies in general. So I would really recommend, whether you are joining Jannah Institute, Gems of Light, or whether Qalam or Maghrib Institute, whatever it is, take it as you're completing a set of programs in order to make sure that you're getting a complete picture and you're studying from various shuyukh or shaykhat. And when you're studying from different ends, hopefully, inshallah, that will, one, keep you persistent. Two, that will give you, I would say, springs coming from different resources. The springs that coming from different resources will actually help, cultivate a bigger picture and bring about, inshallah, a stronger bond between you and the resources, and between you and even, I would say, those figures that are doing an excellent job. And it's important to connect not only to the resources. Remember when we were talking about the ayah and we're there, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So that's that تَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ and تَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. التَّوَاصِي, what is it, tawasi? التَّوَاصِي actually means to support one another, to embrace one another on truth, and also patience. And that's the same thing in where, when you're part of a program, it basically brings in that type of embracement. You become embraced by them, and you would embrace them as well. You would embrace the resources, and you would even be able to live and have that courage. You see, it's, as much as we want to, I would say, enhance our own, let's say, individual courage, but I think it's really important to recognize that we still need that support to give us that, I would say, that courage, and feel that someone else is helping me stand up to say the truth, rather than me being isolated. I think feeling isolated and feeling alone in this battlefield, and I'll call it battlefield, because right now you could see that there is this crisis in where there's this push, and it's really becoming fierce, I would say, once you are, just by saying that you refuse to use the pronouns, that you would actually be labeled as homophobe, or by refusing to actually adopt that culture, you are then probably going to be not given the job, you are probably going to be not given the grades, etc. Well, that's actually, being not isolated only, but that's also that's a battlefield, because they're stripping you away from your degree, stripping you away from your rizq, from your um, income, stripping you away from all the different things that are going to help you survive. And that's a battlefield. If hey, but and if somebody's taking away all the different means for your survival, if that's not a battlefield, I don't know what it is. I don't know what else is. And that's the same thing. So I really think that to have that community, whether from the community in the masjid, or whether we're talking about the resources to learn online, or whether we're talking about making community even on campuses, is extremely important to help you grow stronger within your Islam, and to make sure that you recognize that I'm actually getting this support, and I'm capable of standing to say the truth, and you're also hearing different ways to say it as well. I think that's important to learn from one another, and how to give about a better explanation. I think that's important as well. I mean, you can't just listen to yourself. You also need to listen to other scholars, other talabat ilm, other other others that have mastered how to present Islam to the public. I think you've got right now Muslims from UK doing an excellent job in the English language, Muslims from the US as well, Australia, Canada. So alhamdulillah, we're actually at a better place than where we were 20 years ago. I'm very optimistic, inshallah. Yeah, there you go. I think there you go. Somebody actually put it. The lecture on scrutinizing postmodern feminism from Muslim stance. Yep, that's it.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Aysha, again for giving us so much of your time and sharing this beneficial lecture with us all. Alhamdulillah, I could see lots of feedback, positive feedback we're getting. Alhamdulillah, lots of sisters resonating and benefiting from the content you've shared today. Alhamdulillah, it's always a pleasure to host you. May Allah reward you immensely. And we look forward, inshallah, to hosting you again.
ربي يحفظك إن الله سبحانه وتعالى جزاكم الله خيرا all for being present, and hopefully inshallah we'll see you in other places as well. If you don't mind, I can share Gems of Light. You could also be part of the Gems of Light group and participate inshallah in the different lectures that I'll be doing inshallah.
Definitely, inshallah. We have a sister who just shared the link here as well. So everyone, please do check that out, that resource from Dr. Aysha, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Aysha. Assalamu alaikum to you. And inshallah, we hope to connect soon.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
And for the rest of you, Jazakallah khairan for attending. We do have some concluding announcements here just before we head out. As you all may know, and as I mentioned earlier, United IW is not over yet. We are going all the way until February 2nd, inshallah, Friday. We have exciting lectures and dawah booths happening every single day at each location. Today we have lectures taking place at UBC, U of S, Regina, and Al Rashid in Edmonton as well. You can check out our social media for more details. And in addition to that, we also have a very exciting conference to wrap up the full week on Sunday, February 4th in Edmonton. We have the Canadian Dawah Conference, the biggest Dawah conference in Western Canada that you can attend. We have all of our speakers coming out there. It's going to be jam-packed. We have the community attending. So inshallah, you can get your tickets at givedawah.com. And if you want to stay connected with the UIAW team and with the initiatives coming forth, make sure to follow us on social media at United IW. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and we also have our website, unitediw.com. Jazakallah khairan, and thank you again to you all for attending. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and inshallah, we hope to see you at our upcoming United Islam Awareness Week programs. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.